David Novick, who currently is with PwC, but was the chief architect of the S.G. Johnson family as they moved from really significant transitions. He'll say a little bit about his background beyond that, but there's a theme that's woven through all of the interactions we've had, which we are now just terming divine synchronicity. In David's case, both of us had dads who died at 53, and both of our dads died when our dads were 13. So, when David was 13. So it helps weave sort of some of the notions. There's so many of these that have happened, but I'm just throwing that out there. So, are you mic'd up and ready to go?
I am mic'd up.
Okay. Oh, the other thing too is that while we're also videoing the whole session, Lonnie has a video crew for families that are looking to, I'll let you actually describe all that at whatever point, but there is additional videoing going on, and I'll wait until the session's over because I think your story will illuminate why that's going to be pretty cool. So, hi.
Well, thank you. And before we jump into this, and I realize it's kind of hard with a large group sitting around here, but I'm going to be challenging all of us and actually all of you to be vulnerable, to be open, to share while it's being videoed, still, to really take this in, because part of what we're going through here is how change can happen, how change can work, and how families can be either come more cohesive or have a legacy of working together. And I think that one is interesting. Whenever I come into a space, I look for two things: where I'm going to be going and where the bathroom is. And so as I was heading to the bathroom, etched in stone, it says, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And similarly, with a family, many families just go through life. You just go from day to day, and you're tied by genetics, and shouldn't that be enough? But yet with your businesses, you work really hard. I mean, you've got mission statements, vision, you talk about it, you post it on walls. In the old days, people had a cat hanging, saying hang in there, but really post things and then make them come to life. Yet when it comes to the family, you leave it to chance often. And I think that's part of what I and the rest of this group is going to talk about, is the fact that you can truly impact your family, and your family can ultimately impact the world. And so what we're going to talk about, and I'll start a quick little bit about me and then turn it directly over to them. And when I say me, actually the family that I worked with, and that was the Johnson family and actually the Keelan family, the majority owners of the S.C. Johnson Company, dedicated to family and to the world. For those who don't know, Ziploc, Raid, Glade, Off, most people have, Mrs. Myers, I'll throw in there now, most people have at least one of their products in their home, 98%. But going back in time, that is a family that now is up to a 7th generation. When I was brought in, it was the transition from the 4th to the 5th generations. And Sam Johnson, the 4th generation leader, became very focused on this. He actually formed the family office in the 70s. And while family offices can do great things from the standpoint of helping with wealth and wealth transfer, and they're very important for that, that's not really where my focus comes in. My focus comes in with the family transfer and keeping a family together. And actually, I worked with some others, another group that I know well, another family, and they talk about the big F and the little f. The big F being kind of the main area, and then as children come on and they have other families, those are the little f's. So how is that done? And is it something that's just left per chance? Now, Sam Johnson decided that he was going to take a trip. And when we talk about a trip, his father, HF, in the 40s, had basically flown a Sikorsky, or had someone fly a Sikorsky amphibian plane to Fortaleza, Brazil, to find the carnauba palm, because that was the lifeblood of S.C. Johnson. It was a wax company. And he had written to Sam, Sam, I hope you'll take this trip one day. It changed my life. I think it could change yours. Sam decided as he was older that he would have an exact replica of that plane built. The plane had been destroyed. And actually, for the library that you mentioned, I would strongly recommend people take a look at Carnauba, a son's memoir. It's an amazing film. That is what I'll be describing quickly. And the focus here was the journey, yes, and he is a pilot and his children were pilots, his 2 boys went with him, but that's the backdrop. The real journey that he was taking was determining whether his father loved him as a father or whether his father really loved him because he was the next successor to run S.C. Johnson. And that's an internal battle, and I won't get into that one. He made his own decisions on that. The other thing when I talk about vulnerability that is important is he shared as part of this movie the fact that his mother and then he had succumbed to alcoholism. And here you now have the leader of a major company putting out on film that he was an alcoholic, highly functioning alcoholic, an alcoholic nonetheless, and that his family actually is what came to his rescue and saved him. He ultimately went into treatment and, while always an alcoholic, got past it. What this did by putting this out there, putting this on video, was countless CEOs and CFOs ultimately were willing to address their similar issues. So that fact of being vulnerable, about putting something out there, can really open it up and really help the world ultimately progress. Later in his life, he was very focused on videoing, did lots and lots of videos of different things that were important to the family, historical things, not focused on him as an individual, but things that he felt would be important for the next generation to learn, to understand, to basically be able to grow from. Not to set it in stone and say, this is how it must be done, but to say, this is how we've done it. And frankly, there were certain things that are set in stone. S.C. Johnson would always remain a private company, and that they were always going to be passing it down from one generation. They were caretakers for the next generation of family members. So I could not have been more excited when I was introduced to 2 families that are sitting up here with me now, that I think they're paths to this understanding that a family office, whatever you want to call it, isn't something that just happens. I mean, it will happen. You don't have to do anything. You'll have a family for some period of time. But it's something where if you can be intentional about it, if you can put the time and effort that, frankly, you put into your businesses, into your family, the results can be amazing. And so with that, I'll first turn it over to Lonnie to walk through his story.
Excellent. Thanks, David. They've asked both Bob and I to do a short overview of our family journey and how we got to this point and why this topic became important to us. So I'll start by introducing my family. I'm sure you'd all agree that our greatest treasure, the legacy that we most care about sustaining in a healthy way, is our family, right? So I'll take just a couple minutes to introduce you to mine. So I have the blessing of having been married to my childhood sweetheart for 39 years, this beautiful lady, Shelley, over here. Wave your hand, Shelley. We've been best friends since we were teenagers, and now we are parents of 4 amazing, of course we're very biased, but amazing adult next gen. Shalane is our youngest daughter, sitting beside me here. And 3 of our kids are married, and we have 4 granddaughters. They are the absolute best, no question about it. So we've enjoyed living out one of our family values, which is building a better world through entrepreneurial ventures. That's one of our core values as a family, has been for years. And so these days, for a number of years, we've loved doing business together, doing investments together, multiple businesses and partnerships with our next gen. But I will tell you, even though our next gen and their spouses caught the entrepreneurial disease from Shelley and I, and we're grateful for that, our relationships as a family weren't always that way and weren't at all heading in that direction. 20-some years ago, I hate it that you set up, we needed to be vulnerable here, but I'll give a shot at it. Since Shelley's here, I can say these things, I guess. We were literally talking about getting divorced. We were business partners. We looked good, smelled good. From all outside appearances, we were the epitome of success. But it wasn't so good internally. We had a couple young kids, and I think Shalane had just been born, so we had 3 young kids, and we decided to go ultimately to a counselor, which we had never done before, to try and figure out how to get divorced in a way that was as healthy as possible for our kids. That was our reality. We'd become roommates at best. And through that process, we learned a lot about ourselves, dealing with the way we were wired. Yes, I was a workaholic. Still am recovering. Every other day I'm recovering. And that journey at least held us together a bit longer. And then I'm going to share with you a conversation I had about 20 years ago that rocked our world. It was a paradigm-shifting moment. Every once in a while you have those, and it changes the trajectory of your life. I was actually presenting at a leadership conference at the time. I had a number of businesses. I trained business owners, had hundreds of employees that trained business owners how to do strategic planning in their companies and have clear values and vision, mission, all those things. And I, at a break, had a conversation with this man who walked up to me. He said, I got 1,000 employees. Whenever I leave for a conference like this, I can never trust that those employees will do what I think they should do. And I asked this guy, his name Greg, questions that I would ask you if we were having a similar conversation. I said, so Greg, tell me, at least do you have clear written value statements for your company so your employees know how to act and what basis on which to make decisions when you're not around? And Greg said, well, Lonnie, I've been with my team for a long time. I don't have that stuff written down, but my team knows what we stand for and where we're going. And I looked at Greg and I said, Greg, if you think like that, you're fooling yourself. Because he talked about wanting to have a legacy company that lasts a long time. I said, you're never going to create a company that you're proud of when you're not around if you don't have those basic, fundamental, directional statements at least written down and preferably intentionally implemented. What I didn't know at the time is this guy, Greg, is still to this day the only successful business leader I know who's more intentional about leading his family on a multi-generational basis than he is about leading his businesses. So Greg sabotaged me. In that moment, he looked at me and said, Lonnie, let me ask you this. Do you have clear written values for your family? Clear written mission statement for your family? I bit right into it. I said, Greg, no, I don't have that stuff written down. It's my family. Come on, they know what we stand for and where we're going. And Greg looked at me and he said, Lonnie, if you don't have those things written down for your family, what that tells me is that you care more about your business success than you care about your family legacy. I argued back because my ego wouldn't allow me to accept that truth. And somewhere in the middle of that argument, Greg asked me this question that rocked my world. So Greg said, why do you invest so much time and energy developing clear mission, vision, values for your business, but you don't take the same intentional approach to leading your family? I didn't even know where to begin doing that. I'd never thought about it that way before. I'm ashamed to admit now. And now for 20 years, Greg has become one of my dearest friends. He has pushed me, prodded me, goaded me, encouraged me to think about my family with the same intentional, strategic thought. Not treating my family as a business, but with the same intentionality of building culture and sustainability across the generations as I do my businesses. And that changed our world. We'll, I'm sure, share more on that. But the short version is we developed 20 years ago what we call our family compass, our mission, vision, and values. And we didn't just write them down, but we have had intentional processes over the years that we have used those as the basis for guiding our decisions and actions as individuals and a family. And then, even more importantly, we have developed specific pathways for implementing those in our family through how we do our family council meetings, through how we do our annual strategic planning meetings. We developed a series of 6 intentional, what we call relational pathways that over the years, my buddy Greg, over the time we've met other families who have helped us on this journey significantly, who are generations further down the road on this. But basic questions like, okay, what do you do? What are the routine disciplines you practice in your business that help perpetuate culture and values and purpose? In my case, we've had thousands of employees in dozens of states. You have to do that intentionally, right? So the question is, what do you do to do that intentionally in business? And what could be a potential corollary in my family, but in a highly relational approach? So those are some practices that we've developed over the years. And one of the things I'll just mention is we do have 4 values: faith, love, growth, and leadership, and some definitions under those. And we've used those as a basis for family decisions and pointed to them as a basis for business decisions over the years. But what I'm more excited about is our next gen. This is Shalane, and yes, I was excited to see Sam wearing his kilt today. Where's Sam? Raise your hand, Sam. So, she went literally halfway around the world to find her true love in Scotland. But in each of our next gen, the married kids have developed their own family compass, their own clear mission, vision, values. This is Sam and Shalane's. And if you look closely, you'll see that they're not identical to the prior generations. We never told our next gen they had to have the same exact values as our prior generation. But they're clearly built on them, and there's alignment with the prior generation, but they're empowered to be architects of their own destiny. And that creates a river of shared culture that flows from generation to generation that's been extremely valuable in our family. So that's my intro.
Great. How do we want?
You're next, Bob.
I think we're going to go to you, Bob.
Do you want me to do our side
Yeah.
and then we go to the kids? Sure.
Yeah.
Oops, I keep going the wrong way in this.
Okay. So thanks for sharing that. Ours is a very sort of different path to a very similar conclusion. I mentioned my mom's side of the family being Ukrainian. My dad's side was Lithuanian, Poland, and Russia between the great-grandparents. So for the most part, we are that persecution-driven family. It was the pogroms, so it was pre-World War II. But essentially, my grandmother virtually told us stories while she was alive about having to step over dead bodies of the slain family members and friends in the shtetl in the Ukraine called Lipetov, for you that know that area. And just profoundly at 6, and there were 10 of them or 8 of them coming across, but they somehow made it. And it was a complete Fiddler on the Roof kind of existence. So, when you're on the run, you educate your own. And so that was what that whole family thing was all about, was the education behind it. So my mom and dad were born here, but my dad's dad died when he was, as I said earlier, 13 years old. So now we're in the middle of the aftermath of the Depression, so the poverty is still rampant. In fact, it's even worse. And he's basically, has to drop out in the 9th grade and put his sister through music school, to help take care of his mother. He was in the gangs of Pittsburgh. And so you can only imagine how profound his desire to make sure his kids had the education that he didn't have, because that's what we were told. Education is your ticket to life. And off we go. So I was the oldest of 5 kids. Nobody didn't bring home anything but an A, not because you'd ever be punished, but because the joy in his face was so great that you were going to be able to get what he didn't have. And so it was an idyllic childhood from that point of view. Unfortunately, without any high school education, what he had to do to scrap enough, to keep us sustained was tough. So I don't know what the very lowest rung of middle class could be. We weren't poor because I knew what poor looked like. He was actually in the food business. We ate like kings. So, I don't know what fell off the back of the truck, but we ate well. But, at the end of the day, all he kept drilling into us was that use your education, but don't think that education by itself, without some basic street smarts, is going to get you there. You see a green light and cross the street, you're an idiot. If you didn't look both ways twice and you get hit, that education of what that light meant nothing to you. So it was a kind of a profound way to grow up, and his biggest message to us was, find something you love to do, find a passion. I don't care if you're a garbage man, be the best garbage man on the planet, and you will find happiness, right? Just make sure it's a vocation. Whatever it is that you love that you can turn into. If not, just call it a hobby, because that's what it'll be, and find something else. And so that was my life growing up, and as you might imagine, worked out wonderfully. I was the first kid in the history of both families to go to college, go to Ivy League school, got a Wharton education. IBM, which was a fabulous start in my life. And then he passed away at 53. So here I am in my mid to late 20s, and I'm the oldest of 5, and it hits me like a brick that I got all of him, and none of the rest of them did. So, why'd you start that? So I just got really intentional about chronicling his life and his lessons, and making sure that all my kid sisters and brother would have that underscoring. And so we started writing stuff down. But the one thing that was very clear in this vision of ours was that I was already so blessed to have more money than anybody in our family had ever had, that what became really clear in his world was that it wasn't the financial capital that was going to get you where you needed to go. It was going to be the network that you built off of your good word, your good work, the way in which you treated other people. So this was the end statement. This is the family I'm now blessed to have. Where's Kathy, my absolutely stunning wife? Where are you, babes? She can't stand up now. Sorry, honey. Anyway, I'll leave you with just 2 graphics that have really been very helpful to me. Oh, I actually have to do this. I don't know.
I'm not sure if we did something right or wrong, but both our wives are crying.
Yeah. All right. So this vision is my dad's wheel, as we called it. You start with your passion, and if you have enough passion, what it's essentially going to do is motivate you. It's going to allow you to recognize the only boss in your life will be the mirror. That's the only thing that ever matters. So don't cheat it, and you won't cheat you. And ultimately, you will never fear failure. In fact, in our household, every Sunday, we would literally talk about what didn't work, and therefore, what did you learn? And that resilience was the defining issue as to why our house was always the house that all the kids came to eat. Not only because we had all that great food falling off the truck, but we just drew people together for that purpose, and that has continued to watch as people really then find what they love to do. They're going to wind up being successful. And once successful, they know that mentoring is how they got there, that people, and they're going to start to give back, and that cycle just becomes super powerful. So that is the lifeblood of our family, and the only problem with that is that the more focused you are, the more capable you are in whatever it is you're passionate about. The problem is the world is way too complex to survive with just that skill. And there's a whole series of arts and science, religion and passion, at which very few of us can claim more than 2 of these circles that we are truly great in doing. And so his biggest mantra was pick your friends carefully. Find friends just as passionate as you in something you're not good in. And please make them the reason that they know you love them. Because when we self-perpetuate and we give great strength to those that really are great in what they do, and watch them become truly great in a universal sense, then that's your safety net. And that's why, in his view, network was always more important than net worth. And let me tell you something. As you get closer to the end of this train, you realize that even if you lose all of your money for whatever reason, that network will give you the ability to bring it back. You lose your health, that network will console you to the end. So good luck taking the money to the bank. But this is our world, and this is what we live by. And the thing that I really have admired getting to know Lonnie is that because his path was so different, and because he's a maniacal preparer, he has created a not-for-profit organization, and codified so much of what we've done. And that is something that is being made available as we're here, and we'll talk more about that, but I really want to get to the kids, so let's figure out what your either next steps are.
Yeah, well, we're going to go both ways with some questions, but I'm going to get to your son actually right now, because you didn't mention, so I've known you a whole few minutes now, but from everything that I've learned.
It's been a great few minutes.
Yeah, it's been a good time. Chad is a savant musician, amazing musician, love of music, is in Miami, and there's a legacy component here that comes into it, whereas you have a point where Chad is realizing the impact that music has, the impact of the group that he's playing with can have on underprivileged people and others, and comes up with this concept of how can I do something with this? What can I make with this? And ultimately, going a couple steps for time, forms a nonprofit, speaks with his father about this, about how to fund and take musical instruments and ultimately teach children and give them an area to perform and mentor them. And the legacy part, I think, is that as I look at it, and tell me where I'm wrong, Bob buys into this and ultimately now is frankly in some way working for his son. Don't know if you agree to that or not, but walk us through how ultimately.
Yeah, I don't know if I would agree with that totally. But I think the important piece that is left out is that it was really driven by passion. Music was the thing that I got to find in life that was my identity and my purpose, and the thing that drove every other decision that I made with extreme clarity. And probably the only thing that really drove it with that amount of clarity that I was aware of until I had this experience at this juvenile detention center and realized that as a musician, we had this ability to connect with young people that were unreachable. And so seeing a kind of an unjust and unequitable world where access is not afforded to everyone the same way it was afforded to me growing up, it was walking away from that saying, you can do something, you see the problem, it's a can't unsee moment. And music was already my can't not do thing, And I think tracing back and in hindsight, everything's very clear, but all of those values where, failure has been at the precipice of every kind of next step in that journey, because I had no idea what I was doing other than how I knew it should feel, which is, this experience in this juvenile detention center was, we showed up with our instruments. We were told, okay, you can't bring the guitars in because the strings could be used to strangle you, and had a very sobering moment, and ended up walking into this juvenile detention center and failing miserably talking to these young people. And then we started playing, and then the head started nodding, and then, within 10 minutes, all of a sudden, everyone's jamming and grooving and bopping to the beat, and these kids are creating. And then after that, how that broke down the walls and allowed these stories to be heard for the first time as told by these kids. It provided dignity and voice to lived experience in a way that these kids had not experienced or certainly had never been asked. And realizing the power in that and sharing your story in that way was a transformational moment to me. And that's where it's all right, how do we continue to do this when music's getting taken out of all these schools and I wouldn't be here today without it? And so that was kind of the thing and the conversation that we had. And the tough part about growing up that way is you got the mirror in your face, And so it's well, what are you going to do about it? And so that was really where the journey started. And at various points, reflecting back, those times where I felt man, I don't know what I'm doing, or this might be too hard, and the mirror's put up, but on the other side is your dad, and recognizing the value of that and the gift of that, that I got him in a way that he didn't have his dad in that stage of life was a really powerful motivation to keep going.
I should mention, you can look it up, Guitars Over Guns. It's worth checking it out. Shalon, your father said you guys invest together, you do things together. I'm interested to hear a little more about that, but also I want to hear about growing up with the expectations of a family like this. How did that hit you? How did you work through that?
I love it. You're going deep.
Hey,
Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here. I enjoy talking to people who have a perspective of the world like you guys do, because it's a very broad perspective, and a lot of times there's a huge emphasis on monetary value, and we completely ignore the relational value. And I'm seeing a lot of yeses to that. And so growing up in the Ginger household was very interesting, but I didn't know it was interesting until I got to experience other parts of the world. And people were like, your family's a little different. And I'm like, come to think of it, you mean you don't do like hand motions to your values and, family get-togethers where there's like 2 whole days where you're talking about like how you're going to implement the family legacy, and they're like, yeah, no, we don't do that. So, but I mean, that was reality from a very young age, to the point where like I saw the effectiveness of it, because you are the environment that you're surrounded with. And I feel very blessed that I was brought up in an environment that was very, very intentional about relationships and values, first and foremost, over money. Like, money wasn't really, people ask me all the time, like, okay, but where does money come into all of this? It's like, that is it's not an irrelevant conversation. It's definitely important, but at the core, I think it's the relationships and the values that matter, because the values are what you make decisions off of. It's like a cheat sheet. If you decide in advance what really matters to you and your family, then you go to that before external situations when it comes to making a decision. So I developed my own values at a very young age and genuinely thought like, oh, this is all my own idea. I was like, Dad, look what I've done. And I'm sure you were like, wow, that's amazing. It doesn't look familiar at all. And then I also ended up writing a book for millennials, largely about values. Also was like, it definitely felt like my own independent idea, and it definitely was. And so when you asked like what it was like that was my reality, and definitely a lot of pros. I think my mic may.
Yeah, did we lose? Hold on a second.
But I've been told my voice carries, so you guys should be able to hear me. There's definitely a lot of pros to it. Definitely some cons as well, which I'll just be vulnerable about. I think there was, in my probably like 17 to early 20s, a good season of life where I felt the need to basically develop who I was as an individual outside of the family. And that's a very interesting journey when you do come from a family that from the outside and in a lot of areas from the inside has so much together, right? Like, Dad is one of the most incredible leaders I know, and just super intentional about relationships and making sure that things are aligned with integrity. But at the same time, sometimes when things are so good, it's almost harder than if things were really bad and you're like, oh, I really need to get out of this situation. Like, I didn't have that. So it took a lot more, I think, intention for me. Like, I wasn't forced into independence. I had to like choose it, and I had to intentionally communicate with you guys. And I think there was seasons in my life where I did create more distance between me and you guys, because I think you need that. And, how many of you have kids? Raise your hand. Okay, so you have kids, and I think there's this idea in the millennial generation. I am not making this a sweeping statement. I'm just saying it's more likely than not that we, more than anyone, Chad and I were talking about this the other day, we have everything handed to us. We can snap our fingers, we can get food at our front door, we can get on social media, everything is given to us. And there can be the illusion that that's what we want, right? And for a lot of people that is. But when you come from a wealthy family, everything was given to you just by being in that family. And so I think there's a season of life where you want to prove yourself, hopefully to yourself. And so I definitely went through a big season of that. around the time I got married to the kilt man back there. And it was very interesting. You can dig into it a little bit more if you want. I know, Chad, you've also been through this as well with your family, and just that dynamic of basically how to move past the expectations that people in the world have of you, and then also that the family has of you, because we're so blessed to, have such big leaders in our life. Like, how do you not fall into that shadow? How do you break out on your own?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we were talking about that's probably relevant to everyone is there's this sense of worthiness, right? Like, how do I become aware that I can handle the responsibility and pressure of coming from a family like that? And also, how do I gain the trust that I can either steward that, those values or that legacy with the wealth piece or not? But I think the wealth piece is a really crucial part of that, because if the relationship's not there, if you don't have the stability of your own identity, it's a really hard thing to trust. And so there's this period where you really want to prove that you can do it on your own, at the same time where your parents have created an entire life where all they want to do is make it easier for you. And so the conflict of that is I think a real thing that needs to get dealt with, that I see very much avoided, particularly in the context of like a family office space, right, where you have these actual threats and risks and liabilities in wealth. But again, the relational side of that, I think, is where it really hit home for me.
Well, there's this whole conversation of like, how do you pass the baton from one generation to the next? And the older generation, I mean, I've talked to a lot of you, you're frustrated. You're like, I have built all of this for you, my descendant, and you're just like walking away from it. What's going on? I think what's really happening there is they want to make their own mark in the world. And so I think the conversation is less personal than like, hey, I don't want to stand on your shoulders. It's more like, how can you cultivate an experience where they have autonomy over their own life, and where they're not just stepping into your huge shoes and feeling like they're always going to be, your son or your daughter. Like, we're individuals, and as much as it's like such an honor to come from the Ginger family, like, I feel so blessed, and I am building the legacy, but I'm married now and I have my family, and the conversations we have now are like, okay, how can we build the Watt legacy and the Ginger legacy and also have a sense of autonomy and independence in that? And it takes a lot of conversations.
And this is probably a really interesting question there around like watching your kids choose partners. But one of the things that you said that...
Oh, that little question.
Well, just because I think it does extend, and ultimately you do create your own legacy, with your own family, and you get to a point where you're making those decisions based on what you come from. But more than anything that we've ever written down or that we've had documented, that's not where the transfer, the baton getting passed is not this moment in time. It's a lifetime of watching, and experiencing. And I have 4 kids. The youngest of which are twins. You talked about the little F and the big F. That was our big F. Which has been the greatest blessing in the world. But whatever I say is one thing, but what they watch me do, and the way they talk to each other is the way that my wife and I talk to each other. And so, those things that I've watched, my relationship with work or overworking or any of those things, like, regardless of what was written on paper, like I've been brought up to be observant of the world around me. And so like I had to work through those things on my own. I think there's a really important thing to be said around documenting all this stuff is really important, but what your kids are actually watching is the thing that they are taking. And that's not some moment in time where a baton is passed and like, here's the document, for the family values. It's how are we continuing to talk with, transparency and communication around what's important and where we're not getting it right.
So I know I would love to talk forever. We did want to open it up, and I think Bridget would take and pass along. There's a mic somewhere if there are any questions that anyone would like to raise. Otherwise, obviously, we're going to be available and can talk throughout the next number of days. Are there any questions?
Where's Bridget? Oh, there she is.
Where's Bridget?
She's right there.
Oh, hi. Who's Bridget? Again, be vulnerable. You've got some people up here who clearly are willing to share. This is a treat. When we saw that line of how much it cost, this would cost a lot to get. So take advantage.
Perfect. Okay. I'm gonna be very vulnerable. Advice for, I think the way that you guys have led your families and educated your children and created a value system is amazing. It is the complete opposite to what I experienced. And I've never been in a situation like this before where people talk openly about it. Money was something we never spoke about. I really didn't even know what situation I was born into until I went to college. And there were people that couldn't afford new shoes or new shirts. And I would call home and say, hey, can I buy this guy some shoes? Because he has a hole in his shoes. I don't know why he didn't just buy new shoes. I was completely oblivious. I mean, this is super vulnerable to share. But my question to you is, my dad is very closed off. Doesn't talk about it at all. I know very, very little. But I'm getting of that age where I should know more. How do I get him to talk about it? What kind of questions should I ask? Yeah, that's basically it.
Thanks for sharing that, Nancy. That's a common scenario. You're right. We were fortunate that some other families came into my life, especially when our kids are fairly young. And if it wasn't for that, we'd be in a completely different. I would be in a different situation as a leader, and so our family would be in a very different situation. So I've talked with a lot of families who are in this situation, and two things. One is, unfortunately, you can't force your dad to open up, right? You know that. What you can do is choose to be open and communicate as openly and authentically as you can with him. That may or may not result in anything different from him. But what I found that is super empowering is that every one of us here in our generation can create a new branch in our family tree, right? So regardless of what did or didn't work in prior generations, each one of us has full empowerment to do it differently with our spouse, kids, grandkids, whatever the case might be. And for the next 200 years, we can all create something different in our family. And to that end, I'd encourage, you obviously haven't seen it modeled. So, my passion is to help, people like you and so many of us to learn from others who are a little further down the road in their journey of trying to gain perspective and balance, that there is more to family wealth than just financial wealth, that it takes the relational wealth, the development of the human capital of each generation, the social capital, the spiritual or spirit of the family, the culture of the family. There are families who are in this room who are way further down the road. And so the more we can learn from each other on that, we'll be better off. This world would be better off generations from now. So that's.
I'll tell you my quick perspective on it, just because we were not and still are not super. I'm still not super clear. I think the time that it's resonated with you the most, I'd be curious what you thought, is hey, I need to make some tough decisions. I'm following a passion to do this thing. I'm a nonprofit leader, right? That's not going to sustain my 4 kids, and I want to make some bets around being in environments like this where I think I can add value, and I need to build my network, but I need some sense that I'm not going to leave my kids' education to complete chance, and so I need to make some plans for how I'm adjusting or what I'm doing, and so where's your head at with what's going on,
Yeah.
and particular to our kids' education? I know that those are our family values. Have you thought through that? Is there a specific plan on that? And that was really, I think, the first time,
Yep.
aside from whatever kind of estate
Well,
planning.
yeah, actually, maybe it would be helpful to just reduce it to the one question that might get him to open up, and this sort of gets to where we were. So there was a moment in time 20-some years ago where, thanks to the good fortune of the firms of which I was a partner, and we sold the firm and did it again, and now is at a point where, and this is about 20 years ago, I could set up this family office and do all these things. And the boys were 16 and 14. And I came home and said, guys, I got some news for you. I'm quitting. just it's time to do my own thing. And they were, that's great. And I said, have you guys heard of trust funds? Oh, yeah, definitely. I said, well, trust me, there aren't going to be any funds for you. we're going to take the money.
I remember that one.
Yeah, you remember that one. And your mom and I are going to invest it from here forward. We're going to intentionally try and figure out how we can help ourselves and the world around us. But, like, there's no paycheck coming in anymore. And that was like, okay. But the but was, but there is nothing you could want for in life educationally. There's no tool that you might need that isn't already in the bank. In fact, after you go through any education, if that education is directed towards a vocation, right? Just don't become a permanent student. But if you're actually going to make a lifelong living with this, great. And then, once that happens, you may even need to start a business, borrow. We're going to be a good bank. So, that first of all set in notion that maybe 10 years later, when I was asked after the foundation had started, and we were 5 or 6 years into it, it was pretty clear that now I actually, most can't say this. I didn't force my kids into my business. I got invited into theirs, which is a hugely different dynamic. But the learning curve from that came from being in Indonesia. I shared this with a number of folks last night, and realizing I was with dynastic families, like millennial-long families. And both generations were at this WPO, YPO conference. And I was supposed to tell them how we had built the foundation. Instead, it was obvious to me, this dynamic, the very one you're talking about. And so I said to the older generation, I'd like to know what you think you guys really want to leave behind. And they were in a room by themselves. And I went to the kids, and I said, I'd really like to know what you guys think you're entitled to. And those were the only 2 questions. And it caused a quarter of a day's worth of conversation in each camp. And then we came back together. I think it's a fair question to ask your dad. What are you looking to leave behind? And I think it's fair for you to ask what you think I'm entitled to. And then you have to figure out what that answer is. But to me, entitlement is the freedom, the education, the tools to do what you need to do. And if he knew that, then if there's chips left on the table afterwards, God bless. But each of us needs to figure out how we make our own lives. And that's what Shalane was talking about before. So if that helps, great. Good luck.
I wish we had time for more questions. Again, we'll be around, but thank you all for the time and for sharing.
Great. Thank you.
Let me just, Bob asked me to just say a word about this library he's referred to 2 or 3 times, and some of you are probably wondering, what is that? How do we create it? So Bob and the team that's put this event together are really wanting this not just to be an event, and then people go and got some inspiration and then forget about it in a week or 2, right? Right now, you probably heard the saying, when a grandparent dies, a library burns to the ground. Right now, there's a lot of libraries of wisdom in this room from families who have paid the tuition in the school of hard knocks. And unfortunately, much of that wisdom will get burned to the ground at some point, or the library is not actually even open for anybody to check out books from, right? And what our passion here is to try and capture some of those learnings, even some of the unanswered questions and some of the best practices of families who have been thinking about how do we get better at sustainability in all contexts. How do we sustain the success of our family and the success of our planet across the generations? So to that end, we're asking 2 things. One, any of the presenters, anybody who's up front here, please, there's a sign-up sheet. There's a board in the very back, right in the registration. Sign up for a time to go in. We're asking all the presenters to do a 3 to 5 minute synopsis of the gems of what you shared from the stage here, so that we can capture that to share with this community of families over time. The full versions of these will be, of course, available from Stanford, but we're trying to capture the nuggets, and also some nuggets maybe that you didn't have time to share from up here. So all presenters, please sign up. And secondly, any family members who would be willing to just share a few thoughts or even questions that they have around this topic of sustainability across the generations, please sign up. So the place where the videos are being done, we have two studios set up at the faculty club, and there is a black, I think it's Suburban, waiting out front of this building, and one over there that will transfer you back. It's so the max time.
It's not as sketchy as it sounds.
It's an Uber X.
It's a car. It's a car. Okay. So, but there are drivers. They're safe people. There's no blindfolds. But so it shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes to get transportation there and back. It's a very short drive to the faculty club, and maybe 10, 15 minutes on camera. And rest assured that nothing will be released of what you put on camera without you being able to review it, edit, and approve thoroughly. And by released, I mean to a very, very limited group, just this growing community of families that really care about this topic. So thank you for being willing to consider doing that. And
Great. So we are back here at 10:45. The panel after us, Tyler Barth, is going to be leading a whole series of next generation leaders in their various paths from the four corners of the world. It will be really interesting to hear these stories. So see you back here at 10:45.